Brocius thundered into the disembarkation deck, intense bloodshot eyes scanning the mayhem around him. He was looking for a void craft to transport him to the crippled Imperial cruiser. His blood was up, and he was in a killing mood. The closest Thunderhawk was at capacity, but he strode towards it nonetheless. Thestrian deck ratings and menials were making final preparations before the craft took flight and speared through the debris-strewn gulf between the Scythe's Edge and the Iron Hand ship. The wretched humans scattered as the enormous Moritat reached the gunship, desperate to avoid his wrath. Once in safe distance, most turned to watch the unfolding events with a twisted smile or rasping snigger. Brocius never failed to cause a scene on the rare occasion the solitary gunslinger made an appearance on the flight deck. A breacher sergeant turned to face Brocius, oblivious to his prominence amongst the 14th. This was not uncommon. The outcast Marine preferred to fight alone when he could. Whether his solitude was self-imposed or commanded by Captain Gore was unknown. "What's this then?" the breacher sergeant growled, taking the measure of the hulking figure in black armor. When Brocius remained silent, fingers twitching by his side, the sergeant spoke again. "Feel it got your tongue, stranger? This orc is full. I suggest you look elsewhere for passage." In one swift motion, Brocius unmagged his right Volkite Serpenter and sent a beam of sizzling red light straight through the breacher's torso, turning to ash an unfortunate rating whose curiosity took the better of him, several yards behind. The sergeant dropped to one knee, grunting in pain. This was no mortal wound, not now, and the breacher began to rise, face twisted in anger. He was stopped by a brother Marine from his squad, who placed a rusted gauntlet on his squad leader's pauldron. "Brocius doesn't say much, Sarge. His guns do the talking." The Moritat pounded up the open ramp of the Thunderhawk and slammed the release. Hissing hydraulics slowly closed the hatch, Brocius's crazed eyes staring into the unknown as the doors sealed.
Hello everyone and welcome to Project Retrospective number 10. In today's episode we'll be taking a closer look at Moritat Brocius of the 14th Legion, the parts that went into his construction, and other bits and bobs that I did with this miniature that I hadn't tried before, and other little ways that I was able to fit him in with the Legion aesthetic and theme in general. Alright, so this chap I made alongside a squad of 10 destroyers for an event a couple of years ago down in Southampton, run by a very charming man called Pete Dunn of 30k Frontier. So that's the event's name, the event's group name or company, if you will. And it was a great fun, really good opportunity to run some destroyers and a Moritat now, and also some slightly more exotic weaponry that maybe I'm not so used to with the 14th Legion. I'm definitely one of those sticklers for detail when it comes to the breadth of the arsenal that would have been available to the 14th, and I know that traditionally speaking they tried to keep things as basic as they could without dipping their toe too much into all the fancy shenanigans that a lot of other legions are very well renowned for taking into the battlefield. So also another great opportunity to paint black armor and play around with some enamel washes and things along those lines. So I think this is when I first got into magnetizing as well, but I will go into great detail in the next segment with the actual nitty-gritty of the conversion itself. But here we go. So today's episode number 10, Brocius. Now, fun fact: when I was getting around to making this guy, naming him, I had a look at the top 10 most renowned gunslingers of the Wild West, and Brocius is just a slight adaptation of one of those names. So I'm sure in the notes I'll in the meantime I would have looked up the name that I based the scar on and I'll pop it down there. But a little fun thing that you can do with your characters. So now this it may be the first Moritat of the Legion, but he is by no means the last, and a lot of you will have seen the twin plasma chap that I made fairly recently. Just needs to finish basing him, and he's good to get some paint on as well. I like to make these guys very, very big indeed. So this is a 40mm base, and you can see that he absolutely fills it with his bulk and stature. And I also plan to have possibly a third Moritat with twin flamers. So obviously the Death Guard, one of their Legion specific traits is that they can make the most of chem munitions with their flamers, which gives them some nasty bonuses. So but without further ado, let's get on to the body of the video and break down the conversion for you guys. Enjoy. As per usual, I will break this guy down from the bottom up in terms of base components and all this kind of stuff. I've done my absolute best to try and source all the specific parts and the kits that they come from beforehand, but I've been stumped on one. There's always one every video that I don't quite know where the hell it came from or how it ended up in my bits box, but everything else I can give you a very good idea of where to source them from. So the base itself was entirely made by hand, using a mixture of textured diamond plasticard, some plastic tubing, a grating from a really old Games Workshop brass etch sort of basing kit, as it were, sort of a slightly imperial grating, and then I used some green stuff, little tentacles that I'd made. Again, this is the Legion has just really turned now, and they're starting to really experience a lot of Nurgle's touch and the boons that he offers them. So this guy, obviously, he keeps going. He's got his intestines falling out of a big old hole in his armour there, but he does not give a single fuck, basically. So he wants to keep going, keep chewing his way through enemy ranks, and being a broody motherfucker all round. So, but yeah, so essentially, used the body, the main body of the conversion. The legs and the front belly plate are from plastic Plague Marines. Okay, so I've used a bit of an assortment there. The legs have actually been true scaled as well. So I think when I was looking at the proportions originally, he just looked a little bit stunty for my liking. So I wanted to give him a little bit more of an imposing stature and add maybe 2-3 mil, maybe even 4 mil space there. And you can see at the back of the legs where I've tidied that up. I absolutely cannot wait to get around to doing some tutorials for you guys, to actually get some really applicable and relevant sort of content for this page that you guys can try at home. But until then, I'll have to sort of you'll have to imagine alongside using some stills from old tutorials that I've done back in the day. So I am in actual fact planning in the long run, well, probably tomorrow actually, to do a breakdown of individual tools that I use and that I hold dear and sacred, and I could absolutely not go without when I'm sort of converting miniatures and making characters for various different armies and for commissions, things along those lines. So, but back to the component list. So the legs and belly plate there are from plastic Plague Marine. Now it's a bit of an interesting one here because I really wanted to use the torso. The upper torso element of the Chaos sort of Nurgle Sorcerer from Forge World that I highlighted the other day for Leon Pudentius, the High Admiral of my fleet, where I got the little Nurgling on his shoulder. So I did use an awful lot of other parts from that model, and you can see the cabling at the top there, and those two Bessagues that have been beautifully weathered using a bit of Nilac oxide. So this is a bit of a hybrid at the front here. So the entire back of the torso has been built from scratch, just to make sure that he's looking like he could fit in the armour. The armour looks relatively proportioned and all that kind of stuff as well. So, but there we go. And I've added the chainmail there at the bottom. So it's a bit of a mishmash of different bits and bobs. The intestines, those guts that he's got, the glistening guts that are spilling out of that belly plate. So I basically bored a hole in the plate, cleaned it up a little bit, and then made ropes of intestines using neat green stuff, and just to very, very gently nudge them into place using a fairly fine sculpting tool, just so it looks like it's all kind of relatively realistic. And I used, I think, a couple of interesting paints here as well, which I'll touch on in a short while. So now back to the model. Both his right and left arms are indeed from the plastic Plague Marines. Okay, the left shoulder pad that shows that battle damage there is actually by a third-party company called Mastercrafted Miniatures. If you're not aware of who they are, definitely look them up. They are a really great resource to spruce up your miniatures and get them looking absolutely awesome. So they do a range of different Legion symbols, chapter symbols as well. They do damaged pads, they do pads with bonding studs, they do pads with little spikes as well, which would be ideal for legions like Sons of Horus, for example. So definitely check them out. I'll link them below as well, and I'll probably pop a little web link on the video itself. The right shoulder pad is a standard plastic Mark III shoulder pad, where I have very gently. Now this is probably one of the trickiest Dremel jobs I've ever done, actually, on account of the very fine lightning bolts that you get with the Mark IV Moritat from Forge World, which is also where the guns and cables are from as well. So whack a picture of that up as well. But the symbol there for the Moritat, the destroyer symbol with those lightning bolts, has been dremeled off very gently and then attached to a Mark III shoulder pad and then cleaned up with a little bit of green stuff and milliput mix. When I get the dexterity back, I'd love to do a little video as well. Just something very simple tips, very bite-sized videos for things like mixing green stuff, the proportions that I like to mix them to get the best of both worlds, if you will, and things along those lines. But there we go. Now the little tapers, the bits of cloth that are hanging off of those Bessigues, they are just green stuff. Okay, so I've just made thin strips there. And what I'd like to do, just to make sure that I can control the depth of the green stuff, is that I'll mix on like a plate. So I'll apply a very thin layer of Vaseline first, then mix the green stuff up and lay it over the top there. So it's very easy to remove from the plate, but also so I can get a nice consistent thickness when I'm working with things along these lines. So the head is a mixture of two different things. Now the head is the actual bald head itself is one of the components that really stumped me, and I did try and have a look through all these sorts of bits websites and all this kind of stuff, but unfortunately my search was fruitless. So I hope you'll forgive me for that. But it's a mixture of a Forge World Death Guard Legion helmet. Now I despise these helmets, but I think they do work very well indeed when you're using them alongside like a bare head. So I took off that sort of rebreather at the front there and just very carefully reduced volume on the inside and affixed that to the front there. And I used two very fine bits of guitar wire. Now I generally opt to go for the Green Stuff World roll maker, but at certain sizes it doesn't look great. So when you're getting down to really small sort of 1mm width gauge cabling, it's probably better to use guitar wire. Now I know a lot of hobbyists that would opt to use guitar wire whenever, but I'm sure if they were to try the roll maker, now I'm certainly not on any kind of payroll or commission with Green Stuff World, but I just think it's one of those tools that you guys should definitely invest in down the line. But I'm sure they'd be converted if they were to use one down the line. Now the backpack. Now this is there's no specific designation. Now I did actually write an interesting bit of fluff with regards to these backpacks, and I called them the Omerta pattern backpack. Fans of Lamb of God will of course know that Omerta is a fantastic song from one of their albums. It may even be from Ashes of the Wake, which is a great little album if you're into that kind of music. But the Omerta pattern, very rare, very rarely used jump pack, because of the fact that it requires such an enormous amount. It requires extremely rare fuel to run. So I had a little story where there was a compliance, or at least an action in which the Death Guard were able to assist a splinter sort of Forge World, and they gifted them the Omerta pattern STC in response. So now the idea of, it's an interesting one really, quite a divisive subject I'll get into, but the idea of Mark III Iron Armour squads or characters being able to use jump packs. Now a lot of people have this misconception that no, of course not, Forge World never made the models because it's simply not possible. Now tell me, if you can have 20-kilometre long starships, why is it that absurd to have a jump pack for a slightly heavier Mark II? So Mark II with extra plating. It just seems a bit weird. Now, according to a couple of interviews that I've seen, it was just simply the fact, and this is from Alan Bly's mouth himself, that they never got around to doing Mark III jump troops in Forge World because they already had Mark II, they had Mark IV, they had Mark V, and I think to a greater or lesser extent Mark VI as well. But they had every other mark, so they really didn't need to. But there we go. So, but these backpacks, just to get back on topic, these are from an old discontinued Chaos Space Marine Raptor kit. Okay, so they were originally in metal, and as was the case with a lot of different kits, Games Workshop decided to switch them over to Finecast, aka Failcast. Again, I have a bit of a soft spot for Finecast because it's devilishly easy to work with, though there are obviously shortcomings with the softness of the resin, and if it gets warm and things along these lines. I remember when Finecast first came out, and you had a couple of models in the display cabinet at the very front of the shop, with the next to the window, and the baking summer sun sort of softened some of the spears and things along those lines on some of the maybe, let's say, fantasy models, and they'd bent over and it looked a bit shoddy. So I think, but in retrospect, certain components are fantastic to work with, and certainly I would much rather use a Finecast version of one of these jump packs than something in metal, for obvious reasons. And metal models had a tendency to fall over, things along those lines. But yeah, so I was able to snag 11 of these in total. So I've got one here for the Moritat, and then 10 more for the squad of destroyers. And I was just extremely lucky through eBay. They're virtually impossible to get hold of now, and you will even find squads of 5 Raptors on eBay in metal, including the jump packs, that have been listed there for £100, which is absolutely ridiculous. So now, unfortunately, as a result of this scarcity, the second squad of destroyers that I kind of am currently working on have had to put on pause for obvious reasons. They're just going to be using the Ashen Circle jump packs, so the Mark II jump packs with twin fuel cells at the back there. But I still think that's obviously suits the aesthetic of Mark III very, very well indeed. So now the only other thing really to cover now would be the grenades at the back. Now, I'm obviously a massive fan of the stick bombs. In fact, the entire squad of destroyers come with stick bombs. I just think it's, again, you get the little sort of, I can't remember. I'm no military historian, but the German army, I think from the turn of the century, 1900s, they often had little spikes on the top of their helmets, and this is an aesthetic that was brought forwards to the Death Guard. And it's one that I'm not a massive fan of. Like I said earlier, I don't really like those Forge World Death Guard helmets, other than the rebreathers. But the use of stick bombs on the plastic Plague Marines, I thought was fantastic. Obviously, not the very graphic skull explosive bits. The actual charges themselves being made of skulls, but just a very plain sort of cylinder there, I think, is a great little addition. So I've added a couple of those that I've very carefully, I've had to probably chop and change a few different parts to make sure that they hang off the belt nicely there. But you can also notice that I've taken a Forge World Phosphex bomb, okay, and these come in a few different kits. You can get them quite easily, actually. I think a lot of people generally have them as spares, so I've got a load of them in my bits box. But then I will always need them for the implacable 14th. But I've just switched the end of one of those there as well, just to represent one of the, I think there are 3, you can take up to 3, 1 to 3 Phosphex bombs on a Moritat. So just for shenanigans, especially considering he has a jump pack, he can jump in, cause absolute merry hell with a Phosphex bomb, and then get the fuck out of Dodge. So yeah, great little bit there, quite fiddly to work with, but a nice little addition to add there all the same. Now, I don't think there's anything else for me to cover in terms of the components, other than the fact that the cabling itself was a bit tricky, because obviously you have to heat the cabling and attach them. So I actually pinned both sides and just worked with them very gently with a hairdryer. I think hairdryer is obviously a lot cleaner than using hot water. You don't have to worry about there being moisture on the component, especially when working with glue and things along those lines. But it's a bit of effort is required, put it that way, to get these cables looking realistic and good. but these are nice and anchored into the gun and into a little scratch-built power pack that I did below the jump pack there, and I'll put a close-up here for you guys to have a look at. And that's just following the aesthetic of a lot of the Volkite energy packs or power packs from some of the other weapons that we see across Forge World and things along those lines. So now I'll briefly, I think I'm probably going to introduce another section next, just with regards to painting. It'll be very brief because I'm no Miles from Little Legend Studio, that's for sure, and no Andy Wardle. But I'll just cover very quickly some of the processes and techniques that I used in the painting of this model. So, but there we go. That is the sort of build list for this chap, and some of the processes that I used to build him. So, Brocius the Moritat. So this was one of the first times I really dipped into painting black armor on models, and there's an awful lot of different recipes out there. I think this is fairly basic. Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of contrast here. I've basically used sponge weathering and scratches using silver paint just to try and up that as much as possible. But I'm sure that I'll have evolved, and the recipe I use, or rather I'll probably borrow a few from more skilled painters than myself for the next Moritat and next squad of destroyers, just so it looks a little bit more eye-catching overall. But first time painting black, I wanted to get this as kind of as matte as possible, and you have some excellent paints by Scale 75 that do just that. I think they do one called Flat Black, which is awesome, really like sort of carbony black, soot black, as it were. So just highlighted it using an airbrush, going up to a fairly dark grey. Again, no edge highlighting here whatsoever. This is before I really was introduced to that concept, but there we go. Shoulder pads painted in a few different Vallejo greens. Again, I didn't really have my finger on the pulse when it came to painting contrast, the importance of contrast, as it were, here. But I did use a couple of different new materials that I wasn't really used to beforehand, which are really good for weathering. I think I had a chat with Stu Mack of Miniature Realm Studios, so I'll leave a link underneath. So if you are after any commission painting whatsoever, this guy can churn out armies, in fact. Again, I don't know what his schedule's like. I know that he's usually working back to back because he's so popular, because of the standard and speed. I think that's the winning combination really with Stu, is just the fact that he's able to produce armies at very reasonable prices. He's able to do them very, very quickly. I don't know how the man does it, but also the standard to which he paints them are wonderful as well. So I'll link below for that if you are interested in getting any commission jobs done. He is based in the UK, in the West Country, but I had a chat with him about getting the equivalent of getting that weathering that I did with my cream coloured Death Guard, but on black armour. And he ended up recommending the use of enamel washes overall. So you can see in some of the very darkest depths, some of the crevices and nooks and crannies there, you've got a slight brown sort of deposit, as it were. So I just used AK Interactive sort of dark brown enamel wash there. Enamel washes are very easy to work with. I think very, very similar in many ways to oil washes. But I think this was just the application with these is a little bit easier, I believe, overall. I also used Nilac Oxide, so you can see any of the sort of bronze elements there, and certainly the Volkite serpentas that he has, they have been weathered using Nilac Oxide. Again, Nilac Oxide is one of those paints that you really want to do so sort of less is more, and you want to build it up very, very gradually. Okay, you don't want to just slap it on, because it will be very jarring, and it will be a little bit too much of a focus on the model overall. So now there are ways of bringing it back by doing sponge weathering, which is what I've done on his Bessigues, if you will. But I think that it's important just to take it one step at a time with Nilac. Dilute it an awful lot, and remember that when it dries, it'll be a lot more intense in the recesses of the model, the recesses of that detail. So you can see on the destroyer symbol there, the Bessigues and the pistols, that I've used a little bit of Nilac there as well. Okay, now the cloth, the drapery, would have been painted using a mixture of red paints that G-dubs have done, including, in fact, I think it's called it's a Doombull Brown. So I've used Doombull Brown and highlighted it up using a bit of Tuscal fur, and then done a wash all over the top there. I've used very similar colours for the intestines as well there, actually. Again, this is a very, very old model that I painted, and I've since sort of diversified it a bit, and I've used a lot of tutorials from extremely talented painters like Darren Latham. If you haven't checked his stuff out, I think he may even still have videos up on YouTube for you to watch. Excellent tutorials. But I've since moved over to some of those. They are a little bit more labour intensive, but the way that he lays them out in a very clear step-by-step manner is extremely easy to follow for someone for a range of different abilities, if you will. So now, other than the reds, like the sort of very browny reds that I use, again, it's quite a filthy, mucky colour. I'll usually do like a sponge on Rhinox hide on any cloth that I have. So just to give it an idea that it's a little bit moth-eaten, if you will. My skin as well has improved an awful lot since. But at least with this guy, you get the very sickly, pale skin. This guy's been exposed to some pretty horrific elements and sort of materials over the course of his illustrious career within the 14th. Probably why he's a mute. So he can't even say anything, as in the fluff. One of the breaches says to his sergeant, Brocius's guns do the talking. So yeah, so he's a pretty pissed off guy, and with good reason. Now, I'm definitely a very big fan of using washes and glazes, certainly with eyes. So I think with this guy, I've just given him a very bloodshot look using things along the lines of... Sorry, bear with me 2 seconds. Carroburg Crimson for the eyes. And I've managed to paint one of his eyes as if it's very, very heavily cataract. So his left eye, I think I used like a grey colour. So he's probably blind in one eye. You've got that scar going over the top there, which is quite appropriate as well. So yeah, just trying to get as realistic as possible. But all this skin was done using a brush rather than an airbrush, and I think that you're able to get much more natural tones using a combination of both, if you will. So with the next chap, I'm very, very much looking forward to getting some paint on him. So otherwise, the only other new technique that I used was one that was posted up by 1K Sons. So it's a guy called Dan Wheeler, who's part of the Legion of Peterborough. Very, very talented artist and painter. I think he's a tattoo artist in real life, but he posted up a tutorial on that sort of burn, that sort of exhaust or heat weathering, which is really, really good. And you use a combination of different washes through an airbrush here. I'll link his Instagram below, but I'll also write down which washes that he recommends that you use and which order you use them. And you essentially just get them finer and finer until you get to the very end there of the thruster, and you get that really lovely sort of patina, if you will, of heat weathering on the model. So let me know if you like the addition of this painting section as a separate piece. Again, I'm no fantastic painter myself. I'm just obviously trying to improve at all stages, but it might be quite helpful for some people to get into the processes that I use rather, and the color schemes that I use for my Death Guard along the way. So, but there we go. Thank you very much for watching the whole video. I really hope that you're enjoying this series, and if you are, obviously comment, like the video, and if you're not already following me on YouTube, hit subscribe, and obviously any suggestions moving forwards of which other characters you'd like to see, so on and so forth, please let me know. Thank you very much indeed, and death to the false emperor!